Gilmore Girls and my earliest memories of Ed Herrmann. Hi, I'm Valerie. I worked on Gilmore Girls. I share a lot of fun facts from behind the scenes, and if you want to hear more of these kind of stories, please make sure to hit all those buttons. The very first time I worked with Ed was season 1, episode 14. We were shooting in the Gilmore mansion, but it was located on stage 14 at the time, which was right next to the Independence Inn. This was before the Gilmore mansion remodel. So everything was really tight in there. In fact, all the actors' chairs were outside of the mansion, whereas when we would normally film a scene in the Gilmore mansion, we would be located inside the mansion. It was very cozy, and I remember hearing Ed and Kelly talking about some old-time radio show, and my husband, or at the time, he was my fiance, Colin, was into old radio shows. And I said, well, I might know the answer to that because I think they were doing like a New York Times crossword puzzle because they always were working on crossword puzzles in between shots. I texted Colin, and of course he knew the answer, and they were like, oh, and who knew this would be the start of a glorious friendship. Gilmore Girls was the longest show that I've ever worked on, and the first that I actually really got to know the actors. Before that, the longest show I'd ever worked on was Party of Five, and it really wasn't a fun set to work on. The subject matter made it very depressing. You'd have some chit-chat in between shots, but that was about it. Right when I first started working on Gilmore Girls, I lived in this duplex, and my fiance had just moved into the other half of the duplex, and there were these art galleries around the corner from my house. Once a month, the art galleries would have an opening, and once a month, we'd have a little potluck, and then everybody would go down to the art gallery and come back up because I had just started making ice cream. So anytime we'd meet anyone interesting or that would love to cook, they ended up on the list. So we were about to have a party, and Ed happened to be in town because whenever he was in town, he'd stay at the Standard in Hollywood. And I was like, Ed, you want to come? And to my surprise, Ed showed up. He was actually the first actor from Gilmore Girls to ever come to one of these parties. On Colin's side of the duplex, when you entered and you looked up, there were these pictures of Laurel and Hardy. They were these giant French one-sheet movie posters. Because we had no room, we mounted them on the ceiling. But he also collected trains and microphones and old radios, and Ed was a collector. Ed, we can talk about that collection another time. Ed walked into the apartment and went, oh my God, there was a train on the floor that went through the kitchen, down the hallway, into the bedroom, and looped back again. As Colin gave Ed a tour of his apartment, Ed noticed an American Flyer train that was sitting on a shelf, and he picked it up and said, oh my God, I had this train when I was a little boy. And Colin said, take it. It's yours. It's just collecting dust. Ed acquired an old train and a new friend for his collection that day. The next day I see Ed on set. He is like beaming with joy, just like a little kid with the cool train. He was so excited. He went to the train shack, got a little piece of track, mounted it on a shelf in his basement. I get little updates about his basement, but that's another story. I got a lot of Ed stories. Let me know if you want to hear any others.